Hi, Candy. Candy?
Yes, sir.
Hi.
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 And it's Crystal, right?
Yes, sir.
Well, Candy, I'm glad you could join us.
Me too. I didn't think I was going to be able to.
Oh, good. Let me just a minute here to get the PowerPoints up. There we go. Does anybody have any questions before we get started?
No,
I don't.
No? And Andy, because this is your first time, what I do is I go ahead and mute both of them. And at the end, if you have any questions, I'll open it back up and you can ask some questions.
Okay.
Okay? Let's go ahead and start the week 3 live meeting for legal research. And the two subjects that we're going to discuss are in Chapter 5, how you search statutes, and in Chapter 6, how you search administrative regulations. And you're probably familiar with statutes, of course, but you probably are not as familiar with the administrative regulations. And this is also law, and I'll discuss how it's different from the case law that we've been discussing, and now the statutory law. The case law that we've been doing the initial research on, of course, involves cases that are decided in our courts, in federal court, in state court. And of course, these are cases decided throughout the United States, and there are federal cases that involve just federal law, and then there are state case law. And we have 50 different jurisdictions, so we have 50 different state cases that are decided. Well, statutes are the same way, and let's review that statutes are what the legislatures in each state and the Congress for federal law passes in legislative session. And the Congress meets all year, and so they can pass statutes throughout the year. Most states, the legislature only meets for a couple of months, and so the statutes are passed within that statutory period, usually 2 or 3 months, and the state statutes are passed. Now, how are we going to search to find these? And it is different from the case law. Generally, when we're doing research in the case law, as we've already talked about, we'll put some terms in, some Boolean operators, and the case law will come up. Well, it's different for the statutes. You can use terms, and we're going to talk about how that works, but there are also other ways that you can identify or locate statutes. And one thing I notice in both of these chapters, the authors go through each one of the search databases, Westlaw, Lexis, Lois Law, CaseMaker, and explain how they do searches. Well, in reading them, that sounds like they're all the same. So it seems like kind of a waste of information. But we'll go ahead and try to summarize what we're talking about here. Now, in the book, on page 82, the authors give you an example of what they're talking about when we're trying to search what's different about statutory law is it will have a chapter and section, where the case law has what volume it's in and what page the case is on. The statutory law is identified by a citation. And so if you wanted to search, as an example, let me try to find one here so we can use it as an example. Let's use the Banking Act at the top of the page there on 52. And you notice that the citation is 12 USC page 227. And what that means is USC is the United States Statutory Code, USC. So if you go to volume 12 in the USC, and these are volumes, numbered 1 through 20, whatever the number is. If you go to volume 12, page 227, you will find the Banking Act of 1933. And I believe that's section 227, excuse me. Then you will find that particular statute. So you can search it using the citation that you're given. Now, why statutory law is different, the author has also given you an example of another way to describe it. And statutes are described by a name. And certain statutes become, should we say, famous or known for their name instead of their citation. And the author gives you an example of this, the Clean Air Act, which involves the Environmental Protection Agency, the federal agency, and that's one of the agencies we're going to talk about, to keep the air in the United States clean from pollution and to try to control pollution throughout the United States. So it's known as the Clean Air Act. The one that we hear so much about now, and I think it's kind of funny, that Obamacare, that we hear so much about and so much pro and con, is that that's not the name of the statute. And I guess we pretty much have given up. The statute's title is the Affordable Care Act. But it has become so common now to refer to this statute as Obamacare. And again, I think some of the critics are blaming it on President Obama. Maybe some of the people that support it want him to get credit for it. I don't know what the motivation is, but it's kind of interesting that the real title of it that Congress passed is never used anymore. All we hear is Obamacare, so it's kind of an interesting way, and this happens occasionally too. Well, as I mentioned, I'm not really going to cover the individual search strategies of these. They're going through each one of the search engines, and it looks like it's pretty much the same for all of them. But I do want to mention searching the internet for a statute. Now, how this is done is, and let me also mention, as I said, the Clean Air Act is a federal statute. So that's passed by Congress, and that would cover federal law all over the United States. But of course, we have 50 different jurisdictions, and every one of those states have statutory law as well. And in, I think, most states, I've never heard of one that isn't, the the statutes, and it might be interesting if at some time you look up the state statutes in your state, they are going to be identified by a chapter and a section. And what I mean by that, you will see the statute identified as, and I'm going to use Florida because that's where I live, you're going to see Florida Statute 723.114. And that means if you go to chapter 723, they're identified by chapters, and you look for section 114, that's going to be the portion of the law that is by statute. And if it'd be interesting to go ahead and do that in your state jurisdictions, but you also can do that in federal law as well. And that's the assignment that we have this week that I'm going to talk about here in a minute. So the internet searching is, as I mentioned, the state statutes are all online now. You can go do a search put Florida statutes, Louisiana statutes, Texas statutes in Google, and they will pop up, and there will be all of the statutes within that state, and that you can look at. The federal statutes is, and again, you could go to Google and just put in United States Code, and it would show up and bring up all of the federal statutes. So the internet searching is probably the most obvious way that you're going to find statutory law. And again, it's just simply a matter of putting it in the search area, and then the statute will come up. Now, I've mentioned there also, you're able to find statutes by the title. And so I am assuming that if you put in Obamacare, which is not the official name of the statute, the statute will come up under Obamacare. And of course, if you put in Affordable Care Act, it also will come up. So that is another option, the citation, and you can also search statutes by title. So you can see it's different from the case law, where normally you're just putting in terms and the cases will come up. The statutory searching is a little different for that reason. And the authors give you some other internet sources. I've mentioned Google. The real area in Google is what's called Google Scholar, and the authors only refer to Google, but it's really Google Scholar that you want to look for. And when you put in Google Scholar, it'll come up, and it will have a box that you can check to find cases. And so if you check that box, put in the terms that you're looking for, then all of the cases will come up under that particular case law. And of course, if you have the citation of the statute, then all of the cases involving that statute will come up. So Google Scholar is a way to find statutory law. There's also a website I refer you to called Find Law, FINDLAW, and that's also a good source, a good website to find information about statutes. Finally, you can also find case law by the topic, just like with, statutory law with the topic, just like you do with case law. You can put certain topics in and see if there are any statutes that cover the particular topic that you're looking for. I kind of like to explain it this way, that if you look at the case law as being the general area of American law, that all of these cases are really in what the basis of our law is. The statutes, which are passed by the legislature, and the case law, of course, is passed by judicial decision, so it's made in the courts. The difference in statutory law is this is the law that is passed by Congress and by the state legislature. So many times you'll find that something that's been case law in a state becomes statutory law. The particular legislature feels that there should be a statute about the area, and they will pass a statute. And you might find it interesting. Two major areas of our legal jurisdiction. Two major areas there are not a lot of statutes that cover it. And that's contract law, most of it's by statute, and personal injury law is mostly by case law. There are some statutes that affect personal injury cases, but for the most part, it's by statutory law. Well, let me move on, and I want to cover an area that you probably have never even considered, and you're familiar with this area of the law and probably never knew what it was called, because it affects almost everything we do. And I like to illustrate it this way. And again, these are federal agencies in the United States. And almost everything we do is covered by a federal agency. And just as a little example to illustrate it, if you watch television, guess what? That's regulated by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission. If you have anything to eat or drink, that's the federal, I just forgot. Oh, darn. FDA, the Federal Drug Administration. If you've worked anywhere, you've paid taxes to our friends at IRS, the Internal Revenue Service. Almost everybody knows who that is. We mentioned before the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, who is responsible for environmental protection. If you have flown on an airplane, that's the FAA, the Federal Aviation Authority, and it just goes on and on. I could sit here for another hour, and we can identify these federal agencies, and you probably didn't realize really how much of an effect they have, but they have a major effect on our everyday lives. And of course, all of these administrative agencies have rules and regulations that they pass. And so every one of these agencies has published regulations that are in like statutes. They're not passed by the legislature. These are the rules of the administrative agencies, and they are found in an area called the Federal Register. And if you go to the Federal Register, you will find volume after volume. It's enormous, the amount of federal regulations that are covered and that these administrative agencies handle. And the Federal Register, of course, is online. You can go in, pick a particular administrative agency that you're interested in, and you can go to the Federal Register and see all of the regulations that they have passed. So again, this is an area that governs so much of our lives, and we really don't even realize the impact that it has. The area where you'll find the regulations is called the Code of Federal Regulations, and that is abbreviated CFR. So if you were searching a citation, and the authors give you an example here, if you were looking for a regulation of what we mentioned, the Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, they've given you an example of that. And it's 40 CFR 1501.4. And so you would go to volume 40 in the CFR, and under section 1501.4 would be that particular area that the EPA has passed a regulation. And again, the authors give you all the different ways to search under the search engines. They're pretty much the same, so there's not really much we can say about that. And you notice that just like statutes, you can search a federal regulation by its citation. And I just gave you one. 40 CFR 1501.4 is the citation for a particular regulation under the Environmental Protection Agency. But another way you can search regulations is go to the particular agency. They're all online now. And if you just put in EPA, you will be able to find the regulations for the Environmental Protection Agency online. The IRS, of course, has regulations online, and all of those federal agencies you're going to be able to find by search of the particular agency. Now, not to forget for a moment, all of the states have administrative agencies. And so a lot of these regulations, and they're going to be totally different depending on the state. Every state has an EPA. Every state has a Department of Revenue to collect taxes like the federal government. And they're going to have agencies, in many cases, that are depending on what is important within that state. In Texas, you would have an oil and gas agency, because that's a major area of resources in Texas. If you're in one of the Midwestern states, Kansas, some of those states, you're going to have an agricultural department, because that's important for that particular state. That's the products that they make. Another way is, just like the statutes, you can find a regulation with its name. Sometimes these regulations become so important that they will have a particular name, and you can search it on the internet by its name. And just like with the case law that we mentioned, if you have a particular topic, and we'll use the Environmental Protection Agency again, you could put in clean air, and a lot of the a lot of the administrative regulations under the EPA would come up with a topic search. So you have all of these extra kinds of ways to search, and by the citation, by the agency that has passed the citation, by the name that the regulation goes by the topic that the regulation is covering. And again, they're all going to be found in the Code of Federal Regulations. Now, the state agencies are a little more difficult. They don't really have a central area that you would search. And so generally, if you're looking for regulations in the state, in a state agency, you're probably going to have to go to the agency itself. And so your search would probably begin with going on the agency's website and trying to identify a regulation that you're looking for. They may have topics that you can search under the particular state agencies, but the federal regulations are under this Code of Federal, the federal code. And so that there is one area where you could search any kind of federal regulation, where the states are going to have to go to the individual state and do a search that way. Well, let me open it up to questions. Candy, you have any questions?
I do have one question. You mentioned find law, and for our assignment that we had to do for this week, you told us that we needed to go on find law and look for a statute.
Mm-hmm.
I actually couldn't navigate that page like at all. So
Okay.
I just Googled the statute and found it that way.
Great. Okay, that's just what I was going to suggest.
Okay.
Just go to Google if you can't. For some reason, it's hard to find in Find Law. I'm not sure what the problem is, but yeah, that's fine. Just go to Google.
Awesome.
And you put that in. But yeah, I've heard that before, that Find Law sometimes is difficult to navigate. Crystal, you have any questions?
Mine actually was the same as Candy's. When searching for it, I actually went to Google, typed it in, but I typed in Find Law with it to see if it'll pull it up in Find Law. And it actually sends you to a page where I guess another student had the same problem, but she asked it to Find Law, and it's not posted on there at all.
Oh, okay. I'm going to have to change the wording in that assignment, because I've heard this before, that you're not finding it there, where if you just go to Google, that's the quickest way to find it. I'm glad you brought that up, because some students have a difficult time with this the third week assignment, and part of it's that they can't find the statute. Well, okay. And any other questions?
No, sir.
I don't have any.
Okay. Well, Candy and Crystal, you enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thank you. You too.
You too.
Okay. Take care. Bye.
Bye.